related event than it is to go for dinner inside a restaurant. The test events included the recent Brit Awards last week and the World Snooker Championships held at the Crucible in Sheffield. Let's discuss the preliminary findings with Dr. Bharat Pankani, a senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School and former public health consultant in communicable disease control. Evening to you.
Good evening.
There are quite a few caveats here, aren't there? One's about reduced capacity, one's about testing prior to the event, one's about good ventilation inside the arena that's staging the event. It's not quite as simple, is it, as saying it possesses the same risk as a restaurant. That is scientifically correct, but it's the precautions that we need to put in place that are important, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. And it is disingenuous to say, oh, it's safe, because it is not. We've got to be aware that at this point in time, the case numbers in the United Kingdom are low, and therefore on the basis of probabilities, you're unlikely to get somebody who is infectious and then is sitting next to you and then they infect you. So under a circumstance of low case numbers, of course, gigs like the one that we've just talked about will be successful, as will going to restaurants also be successful. But in the event that we've got higher case numbers, other things will happen.
Yeah, so external influence into those events, because we should point out as well, shouldn't we, that these government trials largely took place before concern over the spread of a new variant, didn't they? I mean, I think the Brits was last Wednesday, so we possibly were aware of this variant, but the majority of these, the snooker was the weekend before, for example.
Indeed, and it's the more infectious variants in circulation, as well as more people infected with the virus, which will change the apple cart a little bit. So, of course, we want all these events to go ahead and life to return to normality. But as a scientist, I also want to say, hold on a minute, be cautious, because we're not looking at all the parameters that could just say, that allow us to say, it's all okay, let's have a go at having these controlled big gatherings, albeit in open places or semi-open places.
Can I ask you, as well as a scientist, one of my personal concerns about going to a live music event indoors is that I understand the theory of testing everybody before they go in, and if you test negative, then you're allowed entry. But weren't we also told that coronavirus can incubate in the body? So you can have a negative test, but then maybe test positive 2 or 3 days afterwards.
Oh, yes. Set that aside. Let me explain it even better. So when you test, you may test negative, but the test is not sensitive enough. So in about 50% of cases, it's a flip of the coin issue, meaning the lateral flow device has not really picked up that you are infected and infectious, because it's a less sensitive test. So you get a lot of false negatives. Of course, if you get a positive, you know what to do. You're a case, you need to get out of circulation, etc. But if you get a negative, you don't know. You don't know what it means. Are you truly negative, or are you falsely negative? So with lateral flow devices, these are the tests people do. We need to be aware that a negative doesn't really help you. A positive helps you considerably.
What would be your advice then, as a scientist, to us if we're considering going to a sporting event? I mean, they're slightly different, aren't they? Because I'm watching Spurs fans at the Tottenham Hotspur ground now, and it is outdoors, isn't it? It's a slightly different consideration. But if we were going to go, say, to an indoor sporting event or an indoor concert or a theatre performance, what's the consideration?
So I would say your best bet is to be fully immunized. Your second precaution is that the place is well ventilated and it's not overcrowded. And the third bit is that en route to it, you don't go on the crowded buses, trains, etc. And if you take all those layers of protection, you're giving yourself incrementally more and more protection as you go along. We cannot remain hermits. So I say, well, okay, take your mitigation, be immunized, go to the place which is well managed, less crowding, and then where you encounter the crowds, and this is really important, where you encounter the crowds, which is unavoidable on the crowded tube, wear a high specification mask properly. We've just sort of put on a flimsy piece of thing around our nose and mouth. I would say go and buy a higher spec mask and wear it properly as well.
Interesting. In half an hour's time, we're going to discuss this one-day licence that Mendip Council has granted to Glastonbury, and it's hoped in September Glastonbury will stage a 24-hour event. Now, again, working on the assumption that that will be outdoors, the licence extends to 50,000 people. Can you even give us a scientific view as to whether 50,000 people outdoors will be okay?
Well, Glastonbury is not very far away from my home, so I know the lie of the land pretty well. So it depends on the level of crowding, essentially. So it's a human-to-human spread of infection. And if you stay away from humans and there isn't a lot of that loud singing in your face, then it's getting there. It's safe. It's safer than being crowded. Of course, the other thing that will either be in their favor or against them will be the background level of viral activity in the community. So if the background level is low, and kept low, and then you do all those precautions that we've just talked about, it becomes safer. If the background level is like what it was earlier on in 2020, then it becomes unsafe.
Can I ask you about the variant which originated in India? We're told now by the government that there are almost 3,000 cases. And a lot of the areas that are affected, Bedford, Bolton, Blackburn with Darwin, have huge ethnic populations. How concerned are you that because these areas are areas where they've seen a surge in cases, that it could introduce a racial element to this that might not necessarily be there?
Yes, I can see that, and it's very unfortunate when people in power make misleading statements about their refusing to be vaccinated, etc., which is not entirely true. So we also need to be aware that the virus was introduced into the UK via Italy when a lot of people went skiing in January 2020 and returned back with their infections in the southeast region. What is required is we don't really have a good quarantine system. So this time it happened to be India, and a lot of people from that part of the world live in Bedfordshire, Luton, etc. And so it is not at all surprising that they then became the hot spots. What is required is to go in there, enable people to isolate with financial support, because a lot of them are poor and they need to work and they need to go to their factories and shops and things like that. They need support with self-isolation, and immunize. Even the first one jab of immunizing is pretty protective. So that is what I would be advocating. Test, trace, isolate, support the people isolated, and immunize. Even a first dose of the vaccine will go a long way towards protecting the local population.
And previous guests, certainly in Bolton, previous council guests have said to me that there are language barriers. Some people in some homes don't absorb the information. The information isn't sent to that home. They can't comprehend it. Maybe there's no credit on the phone to receive the text that summons them to a jab. So do you have to immunise door to door?
Yes, if not door to door. These are all very valid points, because I have worked in such parts of the country and I know, and it requires what I call shoe leather presence. So it is not going to work by saying we've got a telephone line and you can call us, etc. What's required is a task force, a shoe leather effort, and you approach it via the different communities. There are the Hindus, the Christians, the Muslims, Jewish. They're all different communities, all put together, lovely mix. but you need to tackle it by saying, well, let's target it community by community, area by area, ward by ward, and horses for courses for each place. But we are a very affluent nation, and we're very practiced with these public health measures. So it isn't like a huge effort of, now what do we do? We've got the expertise, we know what to do, we can do it.
Thank you very much for your considered thoughts on both subjects, Doctor. I'm really grateful to you. Dr. Bharat Pankhania, Senior Clinical Lecturer.
Thank you, Dr. Bharat. Appreciate it. Wonderful stuff.